you doing, wrestling fans? And welcome to another edition of John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight Podcast, the only wrestling podcast that brings you back 30 years with vintage audio featuring some of the biggest names of that time. This episode is no exception. We will be featuring two pretty big guests, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. The Pro Wrestling Spotlight covered all the news stories and breaking developments that happened in real time, and now we get to relive those moments right here on the podcast. And speaking of news stories and breaking developments that happened 30 years ago, there's a lot of news stories and breaking developments that are happening in wrestling right now, which I feel I got to talk about. So why don't we bring on Marsh, the producer and creative director of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight. Marsh, how you doing, sir?
Hey, how's it going, John?
I am doing well. It's, second week of the year as we tape this show, January 11th. I have been following very closely the developments that have been going on with the WWE and Vince McMahon. And I tell you, I don't know if you've ever watched or have heard of the HBO hit series Succession.
So I haven't seen it, and I'm hearing about it more and more every day, so I'm going to check it out.
It's one of my favorite shows, and I guess it's going into season 4 or 5. And once I discovered it, I binge watched it. It's about a crazy media company family with a patriarch that is just one of the most evil individuals ever. The kids are all evil. Everyone is backstabbing each other because the eventual demise or death of the patriarch, which hasn't happened yet on the show, they all want to be the person who succeeds the father.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it really kind of strikes a similarity to kind of what's going on in the WWE right now.
Yeah, the more I've heard about Succession, I've only heard about it over and over again from people saying like, "This feels a lot like a Vince McMahon thing, like all the seasons."
Yeah.
And then now it's getting brought up more and more because everyone's all like, "See, it's just like the show," and so now I'm like, I gotta see this show.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody who's listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube will probably be familiar that Vince McMahon decided that he was coming back to run the company, irregardless of what the shareholders thought, irregardless of what the board of directors thought, irregardless of what his family and co-CEO Stephanie McMahon thought. So there were board of director members that were removed. He brought back 2 board members that were ceremoniously pushed out when Nick Khan came in. So now they're back. The individual that was spearheading the investigation had resigned. And then yesterday, on January the 10th, Stephanie McMahon tendered her resignation to leave the company, and she's now gone. And then there was breaking news that just exploded on social media yesterday, which could have been true in a way, maybe not, maybe premature, that McMahon was selling the company to investors, a private investment fund in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there was just an explosion of that yesterday, and that seems to not be true or could be true. So it's been crazy. And then today, a shareholder sued Vince McMahon and started a class action suit because he forced himself back in.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mess.
A lot has happened in a short period of time.
I find it very amusing, personally. I know, based on the suitors, there was a CNBC article that listed several possible suitors, including Netflix, including Comcast, which owns NBC Universal, which included other services. Even Warner Brothers Discovery was on the list. Saudi Arabia was not on the list. But my gut feeling on this, Marsh, is that, and I've been covering this guy for decades.
Yeah.
And I felt as soon as I heard him positioning himself back in that this guy is not going to leave the creation that was his from the beginning. He will stay or try to stay in the business until he takes his last breath.
Yeah.
That's what he seems.
Even the way he retired was really jarring and weird, where he puts out a tweet and goes, "Yep, as good as day as any." And you're
Yeah.
like, what? Like, that's like the least Vince way of handling that. It was
Right,
already peculiar.
but you got to realize, and my speculation is that he might have retired in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
but he was positioning himself during this time to get back in. What an individual! What a smart individual! I mean, when the company went public, for him to work with the attorneys that put together this public offering and to ensure that he's going to have the majority of the voting shares,
Mm-hmm.
that it was going to be his no matter what.
Yeah.
And this company will not be sold, or there won't be any television rights deal if that's the direction they're going to go, unless he approves of it and is involved in the negotiation.
Yeah. The idea he was going to stonewall them if he wasn't put back.
Yeah.
Put me back or there's no more deals. It's like, what? Like, it's nuts.
Hey, over the last couple of years, I felt that the company was ripe for it being sold. It was, my speculation even a year ago or 2 years ago was that a suitor like either Fox or Disney or NBC Universal was going to come in and acquire the company. My gut feeling on that has kind of changed today. I don't think that Vince McMahon is ever going to let loose here. I think he's going to ultimately, and I could be dead wrong, but my gut feeling says that ultimately he's going to either work with the Saudis or another investment group and turn the company back privately so he could run it as he sees fit.
Yeah, if you don't have to answer to shareholders anymore,
right?
It's a certain level of freedom to do whatever you want, and he's already exhibiting that he wants to do whatever he wants.
Correct. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's been an insane 2 days, but yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if it goes private. I know that everyone talks about how big it was when he went public, and that he's always talking about how every move he's making is for the shareholders. And I mean, the fact it's public has been
and the shares went
prominent.
up. Shares went up over 20% when he announced that he was back on the board and as the executive chairman of the board of directors. And then it dropped yesterday after Stephanie made her announcement, but not by much, only by maybe less than 10%. And with the Saudi rumors that circulated last night and into this morning, dropped a little bit. But he's going to stay there till he dies. I mean, but he's 78 years old. I can't figure it out. He's 78. What else is there to accomplish?
I mean, he definitely isn't looking to have a podcast, he did nothing.
No, he is not. Yeah.
He was so off the grid when he was away, nothing. Not even a holiday tweet or anything for someone to be like, look, Vince is just relaxing. It was
there was only one picture I saw of him in a restaurant where he looked like he was 100 years old with some woman having dinner, and he looked horrible in that picture. And then there was a couple of photos that circulated, whether it was a John Cena birthday party. He was out doing something, and he looked just old and horrible.
Yeah, I think it was his birthday that John Cena showed up to.
Oh,
Brock Lesnar. Can you imagine too? I guess his whole life has always been work. So who would show up except for the top billed wrestlers?
Yeah, he has never enjoyed sleep. He thought sleep was a waste of time. He's a workaholic. Has always been a workaholic. Has always been in full control. Has always felt like he was Teflon. He's beat government cases. He has paid off numerous individuals in regard to lawsuits, hush money payments. There's just so much that has happened with him. And he's in the middle of litigation right now. I mean, he's under investigation too for misappropriation. There's so many things that are going on with him, and now you have a class action lawsuit that is filed. I mean, when does it end? When is it going to end? And ultimately, the question I have is that if it continues the way it's continuing, what's going to happen to the company? Is he gonna force Triple H out? Is this a family feud? Shane removed himself a long time ago, sold his shares of the stock,
Yeah.
and basically was berated when he had his last TV appearance. I mean, he's had that exclusion. He left the company for many years, came back. What's going on with Stephanie? I mean, did she leave really because her dad had all of these alleged improprieties with all these hush money payments, and then when he resigned, she had taken a leave of absence when the stories broke last year.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she came back, and I think that, I mean, from the outside looking in, it seems a lot like she was trying to step away from the company. These allegations come up. They can't have Vince be the face of it, and that she was probably asked to come back and hold that position for sake of the company. That is what it looks like.
Or
But then
maybe
now
that
that he's
they
just
were,
back, she's like, all right, well, I'm leaving again.
I'm getting out. Who knows? I mean, this is this is a mini series. This is a fascinating. Just forget it's wrestling. Even
Yeah.
it's an
Oh yeah.
entertainment company that was family owned, that is now public. That there's all this stuff going on with an individual that has basically done anything he's ever wanted, and has ruled with an iron hand.
Yeah.
And now, what's really going on behind the scenes there?
And with a true larger than life character, like if anyone was an exaggerated character of who they were, like it's Vince.
Yeah.
You don't think there's any possibility that he was maybe upset with what he thought the product was doing, and then decided that he couldn't watch that happen at the hands of his own family, and inserted himself back in there to sell it to not the family, and then step away, like put a bow on the whole thing as opposed to what he's got.
I don't think the creative had anything to do with it.
Yeah, me neither.
I
But I've
think
seen
that
people
he
speculate.
had, yeah, but there's so much speculation. I mean, I posted Stephanie's resignation letter on my Matt Memories Facebook page, and people are going nuts on it.
Yeah.
When I brought up maybe Stephanie got tired of, maybe Stephanie left because of the allegations against her dad. And then when he was out, she came in. And now that he's back, she left. And someone just berated me. It was like, "Oh, you're so wrong. That's the furthest thing from the truth." And I mean, the fire plug that this guy is, even mentioning anything, it's all over the place. I've never really seen anything quite like it on Twitter, and Twitter's a vast wasteland of everything.
Yeah.
This has really surprised me. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's not over. Who knows what intrigue? I mean, you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company that has an enormous amount of intellectual property, has a phenomenal brand. There's so many positive things about what this company was and what Vince really did to bring it into the forefront. But
Yeah.
now it's like so intriguing, especially when you're dealing with an individual who has all of these legal problems, and you're dealing with a company that's public that other suitors are definitely interested in, and owning that intellectual property, owning the brand. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, this is such a fascinating thing for me that I am going to talk about it on this show. I mean, it's not like it's 30 years ago and I'm talking about scandals and steroids and sex scandals and all the things that were going on 30 years ago. But this, to me, it's like it's brought time together again, where I just got to keep following it and talking about it, because he's the guy that just doesn't go away. He's there. And granted, he built a phenomenal brand and a company, and what is his legacy going to be? What else is out there? What's the ultimate goal of Vince McMahon at this point? Who would want to be? Who would want to work in the company if you're a performer, if you're a female, especially if the rumors are true about Saudi Arabia? I mean, it's just kind of like it's so Trump.
It's at the very least, and it is wild that of all of the crazy things going on in the wrestling bubble, like the wrestling's the least crazy part of it.
Yeah.
Like the stuff that used to be the focus is now just all like that's a byproduct now of the actual craziness.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't blow it up. I mean, blowing it up, and there's that meme that's been going around. It's my creation, and I'm going to inject it with lethal poison. I love that. I actually share that on my Twitter because it's just so like I could see the guy in a dark room, like no one's getting this but me. This is mine, and if anything's going to do anything to bring it down, it's going to be me. I mean, but you built this incredible worldwide brand, that's beloved by millions of people around the globe, with all the superstars from the past, from the present. And now it's just kind of like, it's a joke. It's a joke.
Right when he retired, they changed the stamp on the opening sequence to be then, now, forever, together.
Yeah.
I wonder if he goes private, if he takes the together back out, because he's like, all right, well, we're not in this together anymore.
Or he could, say, then, now, forever, and fuck you all.
Yeah. Fuck you on the way out.
This is my company.
Yeah. But so the brand is also so strong, like you said, when you were listing some people who were, or some companies, I should say, that were interested. Yeah. In my mind, I'm thinking like any company that has the potential would be silly not to at least consider it or look at it. You know what I mean? Like they've got to have a ton of suitors as long as they can afford it.
Well, I mean, based on CNBC, and I was sent this by a dear friend of mine who works at Warner Brothers Discovery, and obviously they have a vested interest in wrestling because of AEW, and facilitating a sale. And he sent me the list. These were the suitors. I mean, you have Comcast, which owns NBC Universal, potential fit as a buyer, and McMahon has an exclusive streaming deal with Comcast service, Peacock, a cable TV deal with NBC Universal's USA Network. Comcast has a market capitalization of more than $160 billion, can easily afford the company, especially with a $9 billion check coming as soon as 2024 from Disney for 33% stake in Hulu. So, I mean, they're worth, $160 billion plus. So Comcast was the top of the list, and Fox, and it said that they seem less likely than Comcast to pull off a WWE deal, given its significantly smaller balance sheet. It's only worth $17 billion in valuation. Then Disney, the reason there was returning CEO Bob Iger wants to make a splash, and an acquisition of WWE could fit the bill for that. Then it was Warner Brothers Discovery, and this was really interesting, although I don't see Warner Brothers Discovery as a suitor in this personally. The CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, David Zaslav, spent the beginning of his tenure over the merged Warner Media and Discovery cutting costs. And that is true. I mean, what they've done over there is there was a bloodletting at Warner Brothers Discovery. And so many of my friends that I worked with over the years when I was with Great American Country, and we were part of Scripps Networks, which evolved and was bought by Discovery, and now Time Warner. Now it's Warner Brothers Discovery. A lot of those people were let go. There were in every department, everything was billions of dollars was slashed across the board. And the CEO has said, all right, that was 2022. So now 2023 is going to be a time for growth. So now that all of their cost cutting measures have been done, spending billions on an acquisition may run counter to the strategy. However, Zaslav said that both publicly and privately, while he's not interested in renting sports rights, he's interested in deals that give the company ownership over intellectual property.
Hmm.
And WWE, I think that's why anybody really wants it. They don't want to pay billion-dollar license fees. They want to own the intellectual property. License fees are incredibly expensive. And they did mention AEW in this. WWE is one of only a small handful of assets that fits the premise of intellectual property ownership. Rival Wrestling League, AEW, currently has a traditional carriage rights deal with Warner Brothers that expires towards the end of this year. So, but I don't see them as a fit on this personally. I don't. Netflix was also listed. Amazon was listed. Endeavor Holding Group was listed. Liberty Media was listed. I didn't see any mention of Saudi Arabia on the CNBC story that's out there. So it's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Do you think, just out of curiosity, when we think back about when WCW closed, there was not an immediate jump or a jump at all of those viewerships, those viewers going to WWF? So it doesn't, if WWE actually collapses in on of itself because of Vince going private and doing crazy stuff, theoretically, let's say WWE folds, which I don't think it would. I think someone would
No,
buy it.
I don't think it would either.
Do you think it would help or hurt AEW or just be static to it? Because if WWE has a ton of controversy around it, they're the Kleenex of wrestling, right? So would it tarnish the concept of wrestling for other people, do you think, or no?
I don't think so. I think it would. I think it would. I think the Khan family are watching this really closely. They're going to have to enter negotiations with Warner Brothers Discovery for a new deal for 2024.
Yeah.
And once that deal is up, it's up. I mean, who knows? I don't think it's going to hurt AEW one bit. I think it's only going to help. Let's say if the WWE implodes, which I'm not saying it's going to do, in that minuscule percentage that the WWE implodes, AEW is sitting pretty, I think.
Yeah. I think so too. I don't think we'd see a massive spike in their stuff, but I don't know. They've been changing their look up and everything and changing the production, and it's really stepped up. So maybe you could draw in some of those disenfranchised. Like, let's say they sold to Saudi Arabia and they didn't disappear. There's a lot of people who would not be happy about that and probably stop watching.
Oh, I think it's a shit show waiting to happen if the deal with Saudi Arabia is struck. Regardless of the hundreds of millions they've spent in this deal to bring several live events there.
Yeah.
Tremendous deal. Lots and lots of money in a controversial country that really the whole world looks at when regard to human rights and the way they operate, and the death of a journalist under the watch of whoever over there. It's not the right fit unless you wanted to take the company private and say, screw you, all of you. This is my baby. It's my company. And I got my Saudi friends to come in and spend the money, and all they care about the bottom line, and the WWE is profitable.
Yep. Yeah.
It's all about the money, and then you can do whatever you want, Vince. But, is Vince walking a tightrope that, is the other shoe going to fall? What's going to happen? What legal issues potentially could be ongoing right now with him? What other skeletons in closets could emerge? Who knows? I think it's insanity.
Do you think if he takes the company private, he could get out of that lawsuit, that class action lawsuit that he's hurting the shareholders?
I mean, I can't speculate on anything with this guy.
That's true. You'd be like, it would never happen, and then it happens. You go, never mind, it's happening now.
Yeah,
he's that crazy.
Well, who would have thought that he would force his way back onto run the board of directors and run and come in, and this is my company and no rights deal or no sales going to happen without me approving it.
It had to be such an awkward first meeting back in the boardroom where he walks in with the two people he fired to bring Nick Khan in, and they all sit across
Yeah.
from the table from Nick. Stephanie's just like, all right, I'm done.
See you later. Gotta take care of the kids.
Yeah.
And Hunter's like, oh, I thought he was gone. He's back. What's gonna happen? Can we say wrestling, or does it have to be sports entertainment? It's like so much of this. I can imagine that. Poor Triple H as well. I mean, what a creative guy, and guys had heart problems, and all of the shit that he went through physically, and here they are. They're turning the company around creatively. They're doing things. It doesn't happen overnight, but they were making good waves, and now here you go. Even though Vince is not running, and I don't think Vince cares about running creative right now. I don't think he cares at all. It's all about the money, and it's all about the power and keeping control of the thing that he bought from his father, who's probably spinning around in the grave, so many times over the last 40 years. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to follow all of this. And I'm fired up about it, obviously, because it's something that I'm watching unfold before my eyes, and I'm like, this is surreal. It's so bizarre, but it's so Vince McMahon.
Yeah, it's on brand for sure.
It's on brand for sure.
Maybe you can finally get that sit-down interview with him.
Oh, yeah, right. Right.
And just be like, hey, I know 30 years ago was a bit rough on you, but let's talk now.
Yeah, my God, he scares me just looking at him.
Yeah, he's
frightened of it. His look is it's like it's not even human.
Yeah.
Anyway, anyway, we're doing our second show of the year. We had Anthony Paris on. We're going to be bringing on Joe Holloway later in this episode. Joe's been, he's involved in the education. We'll talk to Joe about what he does, and that'll be coming up as we begin to review the show from January 16th, 1993. Is going to be really cool. But before we get to that, I did want to bring up some comments we got on the last episode from Dan Brown. Dan is one of our patrons and one of the guys that really has enjoyed the Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and Dan has made comments, and I'm always interested in hearing what Dan says when he writes a post on our Facebook private group. So Dan says, it's a new year, PWS friends, not just for PWS, but for all of us as well. I hope everyone has a great 2023. However, I can't wait to see what 1993 has in store for Pro Wrestling Spotlight. 1993 was the year I discovered wrestling for the first time as a kid, although I didn't become a fan until later on. I'll be honest, I was taken aback a bit by John and Donnie's reaction to Doink. Sure, I expected criticism, but you'd think Vince just committed the worst sin imaginable. Oh, no, I never thought that, Dan, that he committed the worst sin imaginable with Doink the Clown. Personally, I thought heel Doink was very underrated. Matt Bourne played the character well, and the character after he left the company was never the same. I'm going to have to agree with Dan. Sure. Back then, I didn't get the appreciation, and I think we might have touched upon this in the last episode. I really didn't get the appreciation of Doink as an evil clown with Matt Bourne being the character behind it, which I think really was good. But back then, when it first happened, seeing a clown in regard to all the other cartoon characters that were being promoted in the WWF at the time, yeah, Donnie and I, we kind of laid the hammer down a little bit on it. But
Doink was the ultimate personification of the things you guys disliked the most about WWE. They were the show. They were the characters. And you even gave them grief at certain points. It's like, it's so clear they're working on characters and not wrestlers. I just want wrestlers, He was absolutely personified that. And it's easy with 30 years hindsight to say, yeah, that actual early run was great. But the first couple appearances of Doink, he was not an evil clown yet. He was just a clown on TV.
Yeah.
that had to be infuriating in the moment for you guys specifically. Like,
Yeah. That might have been,
especially,
and I'm trying to recall now, when we talked about it last week, when we talked about it on the news capsule, did Doink actually turn at that point to be evil, or was he not evil yet?
he was starting to be evil. He was
He
starting to
was
do pranks and
starting.
stuff. Yeah.
So he wasn't in full evil clown mode at that point. So maybe that's why, I responded the way I did, which I thought it was a freaking joke when it started, and Donnie did it as well, and we went off on it. But as that character developed, as Dan said, he was a very compelling evil clown.
Yes. And they just were releasing Ric Flair because they weren't going to use a main event. So from your guys' standpoint, here's Ric
Yeah.
Flair, wrestler of the wrestlers. They're getting rid of him and moving in space for Doink. Like, you
Yeah.
guys, it's not a shock that you guys just latched onto Doink as your target. But
Right.
yeah, in hindsight, Doink was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and also, I mean, he Dan also commented on saying that he really enjoyed the discussion on the podcast, and he never would actually get to hear thought he'd get to hear a debate on the Pro Wrestling Spotlight podcast. So it was cool to hear that, and he'd love to see Anthony Pyrus on the podcast more in the future. And as an executive producer on the Patreon level, Anthony will be back, and that he was looking forward to Paulie as well. So that's going to be this episode. So yeah, thank you, Dan, for your comments, and I certainly appreciate your support, as I always do, as one of our patrons. And we had a lot of content out there this past week. We had been off for a little bit, and our patrons were really happy with what I gave them this past week. I included a photo set from April 1980 at Madison Square Garden, which a lot of people seem to like, with Hulk Hogan and Freddie Blassie, Jay Youngblood and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat making their debut at Madison Square Garden, Bob Backlund against Alpha the Wild Samoan. So I found that photo set. I found those negatives right before the holidays, and I didn't even remember going to that house show.
Wow.
But the photos were phenomenal, and I shared a bunch of them on our Patreon account. So anyway, Patreon is kind of the place that you really get to experience the history. You relive this history, not just the 188 Pro Wrestling Spotlight shows that are up there for your enjoyment, and you could put them on and stream them anytime you want from April 9th, 1989 to present. A new show was added weekly. So that's a benefit for $5 a month. And you get this podcast early. You get our video podcast early. And you get other things, from exclusive audio, vintage audio from the WWF in the 70s. That seems to be quite popular. And I'm going to be putting up there, this is the 50th anniversary of the Madison Square Garden house show that took place on January the 15th, 1973. Marsh, I'm sure you don't remember that house show.
I was I was not I wasn't there to say the least.
No, I was there. Crowd was 22,096, January 15th, 1973. We're taping a new episode of Memories from Madison Square Garden, where we will be talking about this show. And this was a pretty loaded show. Just to give you an idea of how special Madison Square Garden was back in the day. January 15th, 1973. Mad Dog Vachon and his brother Butcher Vachon made an appearance from Montreal, Canada, and they took on Lee Wong and Ben Ortez. Black Gordman, who was a big star out in Los Angeles, part of the tag team of Gordman and Goliath, America's Tag Team Champions, made an appearance against El Olympico. The world-famous Midgets were on the show as well. Sky Lolo and Little Brutus defeated Little Beaver and Joey Russell, 2 falls to none. Victor Rivera had a 20-minute draw with Mr. Fuji. Fabulous Moolah was on the card, the women's champion, beating Joyce Grable. Ray Stevens,
Wow.
the world famous Ray Stevens from San Francisco, had just had a run against Pedro Morales the last 2 house shows before that. So he was on the show, beat Sonny King. Bruno Sammartino made an appearance and beat Professor Tanaka. And the main event was Worldwide Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion Pedro Morales defeating Lonnie Moondog Main. And I'm going to ask you, and you won't know the answer to this, but why is this show so important to me and special to me that happened 50 years ago?
And you've been going through the ones that you've gotten, because you went to ones before this. This wasn't your first one.
No. My first Madison Square Garden show was August 30th, 1971.
Yeah.
And I went to every single show up until 77. And then I was in college, and, you things change a little bit.
Yeah.
But the reason was Christmas of 72. I had asked my parents, and I begged my parents, please get me an 8mm camera because I want to start filming wrestling matches at the Garden that I go to. And I got that Christmas present. And this was the first show that I ever took 8mm films at. So, and I have
taken photos before, right?
I had just really started. I wasn't a photographer. I was running Freddie Blassie's fan club.
Yeah.
So I was starting, I was shooting pictures with a little Instamatic camera, disposable Instamatic with the flash bulbs, cubes on top of it. Yeah, that people used to throw in the ring. So I started filming, and I have 4 or 5 of those matches on 8mm film, which I want to share for patrons, and in conjunction, and attach them to the Madison Square Memories from Madison Square Garden podcast that certainly the general public won't see, but the patrons will see. Yeah. But for me, that was a very historic and special house show at the Garden, and especially when I got the films back. When I got those films back, I was just floored. There they were, like the matches that I saw. There was no TV, there was no replays, and it was my own little private stash of movies that I used to shoot. So I did that for probably half of the house shows in 1973, where I took these 8mm films, and I continued on sporadically into early 74. And my still photography started to get better. And it was very difficult to navigate an 8mm camera while you're trying to take quality photographs.
Yeah.
There was a guy from St. Louis named Mike Gratchner who invented, and back then I was fascinated by it. He invented this device that had a camera and an 8mm camera on the same deal. So he'd be able to shoot the movies and take photographs seamlessly because he invented this thing that accommodated both devices.
Just made a little rig. Did it have
it was a rig, right?
Yeah. Did it have the shutter button built into the handles, or did he just have it in a position where it'd be easy to snap?
I don't remember. All I know is I was blown away.
Yeah.
Because he took some great movies of St. Louis and the Kiel Auditorium, and he was a member of the WFIA, great guy, no longer with us. But those movies, and I have 55 of those, probably total matches or whatever, that patrons have seen some of them, and there's still a lot more that people have never seen. Then my photography got a little bit more serious. I started taking better photographs, and once I discovered how you can get first row seats at Madison Square Garden every single show, then it became a very serious thing for me to take pictures. And that story was there was a guy named Mike Abrams who was a freelance photographer like myself, and I'm sorry we're dragging us on, but this stuff is all coming back to me.
And that's a big question people have now. How do you see people first row of a lot of these shows now?
Right.
I'm
How
sure
do they
it's
get 'em?
totally different,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
how was it done then?
Well, back then, there were certain subscriptions you can make. Like Georgianne Macropolis always had the second row seat, and she subscribed for years, and she was friends, and they gave her the same seat every show.
Like
I
a
saw
season
this,
ticket, kind of?
yeah, yeah, it was kind of like that. It was kind of a subscription because on the back of the programs of the Garden, and it's like if you like your seat and would like the same location every show, you'd write in. But you
Wow.
can never get, I'd go and wait online. Sometimes they put tickets up for sale for the next show, the night of the show that you're watching. So the next show is October, and tickets are on sale right now at the box office. And you'd run down there during intermission. But I could never get past like 7th row, 10th row. I could never get in that sweet spot of the first few rows at ringside.
Yeah.
And I saw this guy, Mike Abrams, who would sell his photographs outside the Garden, and became friendly with him a little bit. And I was like, how do you get this seat every single show? You're in the freaking first row. How do you do that? He goes, well, there's, he was a friend of mine then by that time. I'd gotten to know him a little bit. And he was like, there's a ticket seller who works at the box office. His name is Bill Baker. And if you show up the day of the show, and as soon as he opens up his window, you just tip him a few bucks, and he'll take care of you. Ringside seats were $7 at that time. He goes, you give him a $10 bill, and you'll get good seats. So I went with Mike, and he, pointed him out to me, and then I went up to the window, and I was like, how you doing? I really want a good seat for tonight's show. And I put the $10 there, and I was like, just keep the change or whatever. And I got 3rd row seats. I was like, holy shit. Then I went back the next month, same thing. And by the 3rd time, he got to know me. And then I started getting first row seats. And that's what really got my photography to the point where I was able to start selling photographs to some of the magazines. And before you know it, I'm bullshitting my way into the offices of Capital Wrestling in the Holland Hotel at 42nd Street, and got a press pass for the first time, and became a photographer on Photographer's Row. I mean, as a ringside photographer. It was in the beginning of 1975. And I was there with Bill Apter and George Napolitano, and then life changed. But anyway, that's my story. But anyway, the bottom line is I'm pushing Patreon.
Oh, yeah.
Patreon.com/John Arezzi. So these films, some of these films from January 15th, 1973, I'm going to put up there. And they're all different levels, from $5 up to $100 a month. And the benefits are all there. If you want video, if you want the photo sets, if you want the 8mm film access, and all the other things that are up there, there's about 200 different posts, much more than that probably, because I have 188 shows up there. Radio only. So there's so much there. You could spend months on the Patreon page and never see everything or hear everything that's on that site. So patreon.com/John Arezzi. All right. So show 188, January 16th, 1993. We got a good one to cover today, Marsh. And we're happy to bring on one of our other executive producers on our Patreon page, Joseph Holloway. So let's bring Joseph on right now.
Ta-da.
Hey, John, how's everything going there?
It's going great, but if you want somebody to plug the Patreon, that's me. Because I'll tell you what, it's the best content for the money. I mean, $5, it's crazy. And I continue to say to everyone that I know, it's a steal. Even at the $100 level that I'm at, I'm happy every month.
Well, we're happy that you're part of this, and part of the benefits that you get is to appear with us 6 times a year, actually, on this. And for those of you out there who don't know Joseph, you are an administrator. You have a pretty big position there in the Midwest.
Yeah, so I'm a school district superintendent, and tonight it was negotiations. After the new year, we always get into negotiations for our next year's contract. So we're hammering that out through this week, and hopefully it doesn't drag into the June. But it's always fun, always fun.
Are you still keeping abreast of what's happening in today's wrestling, or no?
Well, I've again transitioned over. I'm hard to sell me on WWE. It really is.
So you're not a prospective buyer.
No. But I will say, Stephanie, I think, I came in right when you guys were talking about Stephanie getting up and walking out. How about the fact that, some real damage was done to her mother, and how about the fact that, hey, I can just be mad at dad and I don't have to put up with it. Yeah. And the fans can be upset about that, but this is a real life situation. And, at the end of the day, I don't have to watch it. I don't have to watch it unfold. I can go over and watch YouTube and watch some old stuff and watch the stuff that you put out. And, there's another product out there, and I'm enjoying it.
Good. Well, 30 years ago, we were covering some pretty interesting stuff on the Pro Wrestling Spotlight, and we're going to cover that here today. And I thought for the beginning of the year of 1993, there was a lot of news that we're going to be covering, not just in this episode, but last week Jesse Ventura, this week Paulie and Cactus Jack, and then all the other stuff that happens. The Ultimate Warrior leaving, and he comes on the show, and the unfortunate death of Andre the Giant, the suicide of Kerry Von Erich. I mean, there's so much to cover, but I think this episode is a good one. Joseph, I'm happy that you're part of it, because it really was, to me, a show that really broke a lot of news, and we get to hear Paulie in a way that we had never heard him on Pro Wrestling Spotlight before this appearance.
I was really excited when I had listened to. I wasn't able to make it to the last time you guys got together on the Monday, but I went back and replayed it, and I listened to what was coming up, and then kind of looked at my slot, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a great opportunity to to come on. And 1993 did mean a lot to me, because this is really the time when I started transitioning at this point into the wrestling, and really I was full blown right into it. Ric Flair was coming back to the NWA. I was, again, fed up with WWF at that point. And, Ultimate Warrior, I just over the characters. And really, when Ric Flair came back, I was sold. I felt like that product was just so much better. But then when all of the other stuff started happening, as you're kind of alluding to, it sucks you in. And that was some of the stuff that you're going to get to in this year. It was when Kerry Von Erich committed suicide, that hit me. I mean, it was he was someone that, one of the very first wrestlers that I, you hate to say looked up to. I never, you follow him on World Class, and I would come home from school, sit and watch ESPN, and think, oh, these are the Von Erichs. This is a really cool thing. And I don't want to, kind of introduce me to suicide, and think to myself, like, what is suicide, and why would this famous guy kill himself? And at that age, really asking tough questions that, and unfortunately, that's how some of us learned about this, was going through, and some of the really weird things that would happen in professional wrestling were some of the first times that we were introduced to it in the Midwest. Maybe not New York, but in the Midwest, it was,
we grew up a little bit faster in New York, but a lot of this stuff took, as me covering it at this time of my life and doing the radio show, you get shocked sometimes. The Kerry situation was a spiral out of control, and that was unfortunate. And of course, with the tragedies that family suffered. But yeah, you get covering it the way I covered it, and now reliving it. It brings back a flush of memories, and so we'll have an interesting year to cover. And we're happy that you're joining us, Joseph. So we invite you to stay on throughout the broadcast and ask any questions that you would like to. Grill me on anything that you may have a question about. And Marsh, I'm going to turn it over to you so we could begin our review of the Pro Wrestling Spotlight from January 16th, 1993.
Yeah. This one, I mean, the tone of Paulie Dangerously and the tone of Cactus were both two tones we hadn't really heard from either of them, but in almost different ways. But this one kind of caught me because it opened abruptly. It opened with you reading ads. And I think that you mentioned towards the end, we'll play the clip towards the end, why that might be. But this is one, so we're not going to get a Donnie liable. We don't have like a cool little intro thing for it. It just really cut into here's you reading ads, and then Paul's on the line, and
Let me get right into it. Got it.
Yep, you got right into it. So, with that in mind, I didn't want to play the LNS ad there. The same tiger mask toy that you've been pitching. So, this is though how you opened up with Paul, and you can hear it immediately.
We've known this guy for a long, long time, for many, many years, and he's had his ups and his downs in the wrestling business. The situation that he has gone through with WCW over the last several months was certainly not easy for anybody in any type of position. Let's welcome to the program right now Paul E. Dangerously. Paulie, are you there?
Of course I'm here.
Well, good morning to you.
Well, good morning to you, too.
How's everything going?
Well, for me, fine.
Well, there's a situation that developed yesterday in WCW. I guess you received notice that you were terminated from your position there, effective immediately.
Yeah, that's a very accurate statement.
And there's been a lot of talk over the last several months since Cowboy Bill Watts took the position as executive vice president that you two really didn't see eye to eye, or for some reason you grated on his nerves. He didn't appreciate you. He didn't want you around. Can you fill us in on exactly what transpired that led up to this termination from the company?
Sure, it's really simple. As evidenced by the fact that the man initiated several buyouts of people's contracts within a certain fiscal year, as evidenced by the fact that a lot of people are gone, as evidenced by the fact that a lot of people weren't renewed that should have been renewed, in my opinion, as evidenced by the fact that he himself has said that he needed to cut payroll, which is understandable in the given situation. Bill Watts did not think that a manager such as myself should make the type of money that I was contracted to make for the next 2 years. I signed my contract April 1st of 92, which is shortly before he came in. And this was under J. Allen Fry. And when Bill Watts came in, not even 2 weeks into his reign, I started to receive on-the-record phone calls from people within his administration, people right near the top of his administration saying, now, wait a minute, you're making this kind of money and you have this type of deal now how the hell did you get that? And they were very brazen about it. They did not try to hide this. They left messages for me. They, it was on-the-record conversations, and just to the point where his right-hand man finally said to me, he said, you're going to need to redo this deal.
When you're talking about his right-hand man...
It's Jim Ross.
Okay.
And And I mean, he just said to me one day, out, you're going to need to redo this deal. And I said, well, this deal is good from April 1st, 92 to April 1st, 94. And, I'm going to honor it.
Yeah, he was real heavy, real somber on that one. Like, it was, even in the beginning, you kind of pitch towards him a little bit and he goes, yep. You know what I mean? Like, any other time you even sort of try to get a word in, he's going to take over the show for a little bit. So to hear him the day after and just so calm, it was
serious.
Yeah.
And he's always been somebody, and Joseph, I'm sure you've heard previous episodes with Paul. It's like you never heard him before like this.
So the first thing I wondered was, how did you get the interview?
I called him up.
Just
after
call
he
him
got
and say, hey, want to come
He's
on?
a friend. He's a friend. I mean, he probably, him and Cactus were the guys that appeared on the Pro Wrestling Spotlight more than anybody else over the years. And Paul was a dear friend. And when this happened, and I had, several conversations with him over the course all the time. And we're always talking. But when this happened, and he wanted to come on the show to talk about it.
Yeah. That's So that was my thought because he is somber, and I thought, man, that's a tough day after that. It's a tough phone call to make. I've great, and you just let him tell the story and made me dislike Bill Watts even more. But Fry had it going in the right direction.
Do we know why Bill Watts was cutting so much costs?
He had incentives built in his agreement that would compensate him more for the money he saved and any profits that were made in the company. And he came in like a house of fire when he came in, and just everything that Kip Fry was trying to do, Watts undid. So him going to all the performers and he sees all the money that was being doled out, and he didn't like that. He wanted renegotiation with most of the people that were high dollar contracts, and he got a lot of pushback from that. But a guy like Paul E., who's a smart negotiator anyway, and he knew what his value was, and he got a sweet 2-year deal. And then for them immediately to say, you got to change this deal. You're making how much?
Yeah.
Isn't that illegal anyway? If you have a contract?
Yeah, we get into that at a certain point. One of the clips we're going to play, he breaks down why he believes it to be illegal, the stuff that was outlined in his contract that should protect that from happening. That they just said, no, we just don't want you.
And as we probably will hear, there are reasons why WCW then changed their story about why he was let go.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, Joe, this did not endear me to Bill Watts very much. The idea that Paul said in there as a quote, I never really had a productive conversation with Bill Watts ever. It's like, even outside of negotiating?
And I've always wondered, there's two sides of Jim Ross for me. There's some days where I appreciate Jim Ross and read his books or listened to his books and think, hey, he's very likable. And then you hear stories, and maybe not even stories, but just bits and pieces that you pick up. And you're like, And I get it. He survived in this business for a long time, and you're going to make enemies. But there are, and to do that without being a performer, you've got to do some things that are tough, and you've got to carry the mail for other people. But there are some times where I've heard things about Jim Ross. You just unlikable, and this is one of them.
You love him or you hate him is kind of what the impression is of Jim Ross.
Yeah. And it seems like more and more as I get older, maybe that's what it is. I'm just getting older. And Jim, not liking him. Which is too bad because your childhood memories are, he called some of the greatest matches of all time. And
absolutely,
you go back and you look at it and you're like, wow, behind the scenes. And that's the other question that I had for you during that time. It's just the Wild West in wrestling. They can do whatever they want, and they don't care about the law, obviously.
No, they never did. No, I mean, you could look at everything in the history of this business and, the way companies ran their organizations. And, whether it's WWF or WWE or WCW, NWA or AWA. And, the performers were never protected, typically. They really weren't. They were all independent contractors. And, there's so much that has been done in the history of the business that the performers were always taken advantage of, and contracts were changed, and people unceremoniously stopped being given a push because of political reasons. I mean, it's just a horrible industry if you take a really look at it. It's entertaining as hell. We all love the entertainment value of it, and the superstars that were created, and the people that we adored and revered. But the business side of the business has always been a real ugly business.
Yeah, it was brutal in and out of the ring, for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. Just looking over the notes here. Paul does talk more about how they wanted him to renegotiate. They didn't understand how he negotiated such a good deal when he did, because he was in a bunch of big stories at the time. The Dangerous Alliance, the Medusa stuff, the Steve Austin. Like, he was doing a bunch of stuff. Rick Rude, they had a big program with.
And it was over big time. I mean,
Yeah.
that the Dangerous Alliance was over big time. Paul was always over as a heat generating manager. He was just, an elite performer, and is to this day. But when you have somebody who's running the organization that, ceremoniously then pulls it apart and alienates the people that are in the faction of the Dangerous Alliance. But Paul E. has always been a very smart, cunning, brilliant guy. So he was never afraid also to call up an attorney, or in one case, I actually got him an attorney in his last WCW lawsuit, and he won that suit. And, so he was never afraid to say, you know what? I signed this deal. It should be good. Now that you're terminating me, I'm going to go after you.
Yeah. Yeah. There's words in each contract, and they mean things. They're all put together for a reason. And he was also told by them that he would be minimalized and be made insignificant if he did not renegotiate.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Good luck telling Paulie Dangerously he's going to be made insignificant. Oh, really? I will become very significant.
Yes. Thank you, my tribal chief.
Yeah. But they did break down the as we get towards the next clip, that they were accusing Paul of falsifying his expenses.
Yes.
He'd been under investigation for about 5 months.
Yeah, right.
He had back pay issues for reimbursements since Kip Fry, or no, since Jim Herd, that rolled over to Kip Fry, that then rolled over to Watts. And by the time he got to Watts, he's like, just let it go. And he was saying, this was over $1,200. Like, what do you mean let it go? Like, the company's supposed to reimburse me for this. And so that's when they started trying to turn that reimbursement into even more
shenanigans.
Insane. Which was really cool to hear all this too, because this is the day after. So he knows all this stuff, fresh as his mind could ever be. And I've only read a few little blurbs here and there of people saying this is what they believe it happened at that time. And I wonder how many of them pulled it from this interview specifically. You know what I mean? Like, where else was he telling everybody this detail?
Nowhere.
Yeah. You do go to an ad break, which was a little bizarre, just in that you are trying to talk about Farmingdale Lanes, and then you just kind of say, screw it, like run the channel ads, and then it comes back, and you go, okay, let me tell you about Farmingdale Lanes, and you're all like, this feels really weird to talk about bowling when all this stuff's going on. Like, you were taking the Paul stuff pretty hard. Like,
yeah. Well, personally, I was disappointed because I loved watching him on TV, regardless of how good of a friend he was. He was entertaining. And I loved the Dangerous Alliance. I loved what was happening with Kip Fry's era, and then the Watts era comes in and slowly gets decimated. But, yeah, I mean, I'm a big of a fan of Paul E. to this day, that a lot of people are. I mean, and that's why I was kind of disappointed. I was like, well, can't see my friend on TV anymore.
Yeah. Like, even if WWF wouldn't have let you have him on the show, at least he could have been on TV, Yeah. He had a big question mark there for sure. Let's go to this next clip. He breaks down about the expenses in a way that I thought was pretty telling. Like he was just so open.
Yeah.
And although I did like this, he was referring to the hotel in Atlanta as the dungeon. And at one point you go, the Ramada Inn. Like, he was like avoiding saying it, and you're like, that's the Ramada Inn, right? And he's like, yeah. But here's the clip of Paulie breaking down how WCW determined he was fraudulent in his expense report.
When I presented the evidence to them again, they said, well, you induced them to do this. The person that I allegedly induced is the general manager of the hotel, who they still have a very good working relationship with, who still to this day backs me up.
And the Ramada Hotel, obviously a large corporation.
Yeah,
I don't think in my opinion, I don't think they'd put themselves through a possible fraud situation.
No, they wouldn't do that. And not only that, but the way that WCW's questions were structured was very carefully done. They know, and they know because after my two matches with Medusa in Charlotte and in Greenville, South Carolina, on the 27th, the day before Starrcade, I checked into this very same hotel, and it sent in with my expense report for that week an itemized receipt. I mean, after all this investigation, I knew to get a complete receipt. And I checked under the name of Paul X. When I stay in Atlanta in a particular hotel, because of the number of fans that know that you're staying there, because of the number of fans that will know your given name, because of the number of fans that just hang out in the lobby there, both male and female, I never, ever, ever check in under any name that I could really be found at that hotel by these fans, because you want a little privacy. By the time you get there, you just want to go to sleep. That's just my opinion. Or being a single guy, maybe I want some company, which would be my prerogative in my business as somebody who's 27 and single. I know several wrestlers, some of whom I've managed, some of whom I don't, who never check in under their own name. One of them used to check in under the name Mr. Joe Blow. I mean, and if you look under Mr. Joe Blow, you'll find that he stayed there roughly 70 times or 80 times last year. Now, I've seen a lot of the guys' passports. I don't know anybody who's born under the name of Joe Blow, but I know who that person is. And when they went to the hotel, they just simply said, has Paulie dangerously stayed here? No. They gave another name. No. Okay, well, then he never stayed here. Well, they never they never asked me what other names I might have checked in under, and I even gave the office a list of the names that I did check in under, because I pretty much know the 5 or 6 different names that I've used. But they don't acknowledge that. They just say, well, if you didn't check in under your own name, we don't know it's you. Yeah, sure you do, because the person that checked me in has told you and told the office, yeah, I checked him in on at least half of these dates, and they say, well, we don't acknowledge that. He's not in under his given name or under the name of Paulie Dangerously, therefore, he's not there.
Interesting.
It's crazy. Did you know who Joe Blow was?
I didn't know that he checked in under Joe Blow. No, I did not.
Yeah,
he could have checked in under Joe Holloway. Actually.
Yeah, I wasn't me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of substance here. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, these accusations are pretty interesting. I mean, it just seemed to be a situation where they just wanted him out, and they wanted to find any reason to get him out.
Yeah, you even kind of started the interview with there's been no love lost between you and Bill Watts, and this was probably coming from the beginning. And it's like, wow, did they butt heads prior to WCW?
He didn't like Paul.
Just at all as a person.
Well, Oklahoma guy, New York dude who spoke his mind and was abrasive and very confident in his ability. And Paul was never one to push authority. He wasn't afraid of authority. Never was. Paul pushed his way onto Photographer's Row at Madison Square Garden as a teenager, like I did, but in a different way. But Paulie was a pain in the ass to everybody. I mean, he was just this is the way he was. This is the way he lived his life.
And thank God, right? I mean,
Thank God.
Think of everything that he brought to wrestling because of it.
And still does.
Yes.
Yeah, and still now. I mean, I know you don't watch the product, Joe, but you can't argue that Paul's not in the biggest program they have right now. Still, like he's the most relevant one. It's crazy.
He is.
And again, let me clarify. It's not that I don't watch it; I don't enjoy it.
Well, yeah. There you go. I keep my remote and I just fast forward and stop and go and stop and go and stop and go. That's how I watch wrestling today. That's the current product. But I mean, this interview with Paul is fascinating. And for those of you out there who are not patrons, and I keep plugging the Patreon page because you can hear this entire episode in its entirety at patreon.com.
Yeah.
/John Arezzi.
I did like that you asked him straight up if he was talking with WWF yet. He was like, "No, it's been a day." Like, but he's like, "But I can." He just hasn't. But we have one last Paul clip,
Okay.
where he breaks down the contract stuff a little bit. And this is only like a minute and a half because he
That's
just
fine.
goes through like these are the things in the contract. This is why he won. What he's about to lay out is why he won the settlement. I'm sure of it.
You have another.
No, we certainly didn't. And like I said, I have no beef with anybody who's in charge. It's their business to run, and it's a business. Okay, let's make that clear. This is a business, and I'd be very naive. It'd be foolish of me. It would be infantile of me to think anything different. And I'm not taking any of this personally. Though he sure tries to make it personal on a lot of occasions. But that's his way of doing business, and that's fine. I mean, that's his way of management, and I don't agree with it. But I'm not the one that was in the position, and they hired him. So obviously they saw something in him that they didn't see in anybody else, including myself. And he was afforded the opportunity to run the company, and he ran it as he saw fit. They're doing a lot of things that in my particular case, that I feel are illegal. They're doing a lot of things in my particular case that, in my opinion, and the opinion of attorneys. Now, again, these are New York attorneys. Maybe it's different in Georgia, but when you clearly state in a contract, if you're going to terminate this man's services, he will have this many days' notice. He will receive this much of a buyout. He will receive this many months' severance pay, and you're talking, 6 figures here. Mm-hmm. And then you just say no, and you just say, nah, no way. You're cut off today. I find that illegal. I will say straight out that his wanton act is illegal. It's not only unwarranted, and let me tell you this, John, and this is the God's honest truth. The charge against me is 100% false, and they know that it's false.
Yeah, he even breaks down like why would he, in the full interview, why would he risk the big contract for a relatively small amount? Not small enough for him to ignore the amount and not try and get like the reimbursement, but he's like, we're talking like $38 for a hotel. Like,
Yeah.
Why would I be fraudulent and risk the entire contract? So they found him obviously not to be in breach because they wouldn't have awarded him all that stuff.
It all smells fishy to me.
I also thought it was really interesting that he said that they saw something in Watts that they did not see in anybody else, including myself. Did Paul put himself out there to take over for Hurd or Fry or both?
I don't recall that.
Because by him saying including myself made me think that his name was on the table and that Bill Watts was chosen.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
No, I didn't even read into that like you did on that. So maybe. It's not like I can ask the dude, though, today.
Yeah, you have to go through his tribal chief to get to him.
You have to go through Sami Zayn.
Yeah.
The honorable, what is it? Honorary Uso.
Yeah. But it did make me think also that with him saying the including myself, him talking about like that's how he wants to run a company, I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
A little foreshadowing.
Yep, definitely. And all these things started just piling up and piling up and piling up on Watts. And then, he says a few statements and pisses off Henry Aaron. And then he gets the boot. So that's some stuff we'll be covering in the future.
Yeah.
So during that time, because I was a little bit too young, was it just the overcorrection? I mean, I know Bill Watts from Oklahoma, but just the overcorrection to what WWE was doing at the time. Like they're going so far this way that we have to go just that much further the other way.
I think the company, obviously WCW and NWA wanted more realism and less characters, less cartoon characters. It was a whole different style. When Hurd was in, he tried to emulate and copy WWF, copy them poorly. But they were in different directions as far as creatively, for sure.
Yeah, I wondered during that time. I didn't watch WWF at all. It just stopped appealing to me. I felt like it's just during that era, it wasn't cool. It was just for kids, and I was a teenager. But then it became like, wow, this isn't cool either under the Watts era. And kind of lost.
So it was turning you off, and we might have lost you 30 years ago from being a wrestling fan. We were close, but here you are.
Here we are. Yeah. Sorry.
Was that during wasn't that when the Ding Dongs were around, if I remember correctly?
Ding Dongs were 89.
89?
Yeah. That was probably the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. You had this tag team Jim Herd put together for the kids that had bells attached to their outfits, and they were masked wrestlers. And the thing is like they didn't experiment enough with it because let's say if the Ding Dongs were running the ropes, bells would start falling off the outfits. But fortunately, the idea that he really wanted to do, which he was, convinced not to, was the hunchback gimmick. He says a hunchback can never lose because he has got a hunchback and can't be pinned.
Yeah. Love it. So good.
A Pizza Hut executive comes in to run a wrestling company.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah. I know how to win this match. It's impossible to lose it. I always win. So good, dude. Joe, did you have something?
No.
Sorry. Okay. Oh, you're fine. Do you think if we had no Ding Dongs, we get no Doink? I'm just kidding. That's what we have though for the Paul Dangerous
man tag though, right?
Oh yeah, there you go. It could have been a good Survivor Series. Just missed. Ships in the night. But it was really cool, and you ended up with Paul for I think the majority of the show. It was about a half an hour.
Yeah, it was a long segment.
And you were only on this episode for about 45 minutes, 42, I think, if I remember correctly, my timestamps. Because as we'll get into after this clip, you ran late. You were coming in late.
Coming in late, and who knows what was going on.
You give a little bit of an answer, but it's after this clip. This clip we got is Cactus Jack coming on. Yeah, and this actually just him talking about. I like so much about the way that you guys maintained not trying to use very much like kayfabe lingo.
That's his choice.
I mean,
no, it was like non-kayfabe lingo.
Yeah, like you talking about fan favorites. You'll never say babyface, but you'll be like, oh, he's always been sort of a fan favorite, but now he's a real fan favorite. Yeah. I always appreciated that. But
he never really wanted to totally go all the way in. He always did his best to protect some of the real inside stuff of the business.
Was that exclusive to Cactus? Because I feel like you guys did that as much as you could regardless.
Well, it was more... I knew how far to push, I was on inside stuff with Cactus, and Paulie was a little bit more inside. It depends on the individual.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. Okay, this is the beginning of the interview. It was kind of a relatively short one. He says he's got to catch a flight, and he's talking very soft as well, which I thought was interesting because the last number of times we've heard him, he's working his character out.
Maybe he's at an airport.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, he might just be in an airport in a corner somewhere trying to do this interview. Here it goes.
Cactus, good
Yeah.
morning to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Just a lot of news breaking here in the world of professional wrestling. A lot of things going on which we have to cover. But of course, something great is happening in your career. There's been a situation that's developed. You are now hearing the cheers of the fans, which you've heard from a number of the hardcore fans throughout the course of your career. And now you're feuding with guys like Van Vader, Paul Orndorff, and how do you feel about everything that's been going on in your life over the last few weeks?
Well, John, maybe it's too great a thing that's happening. Maybe Cactus Jack, one man isn't enough to fight off, two of the toughest opponents ever, really, in wrestling. As far as cheers, yeah, it's surprising how with just one change of opponents can change a lot of people's minds. Maybe they see some things in Cactus Jack that they refused to see before. As far as cheers, we were in Alabama last night, and yeah, it's the first time south of, say, Baltimore or so that I've ever heard any cheers from the people. And I like it, but that's not really what fuels me, okay? Hey, I'll tell you the one change that I've seen in me is that no longer am I fighting for payoffs from Paulie Dangerously or somebody. No longer can I be considered a hitman. Now it boils down to what really makes the sport great, and that's hatred. For the first time, I've got legitimate hatred to people who did something to me. Van Vader, world champion or not, 450 pounds or not, the toughest man in wrestling or not, and Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful or not, you find out that you just crossed the line that you're about to pay for.
Babyface.
Fan favorite Cactus Jack. Yeah, was he being a little bit more serious? Do you think just because he was being babyface, he didn't want to come off like the crazy Cactus?
Yeah, and I don't think he was even entirely happy with that turn.
Oh, okay.
That might have been a Watts thing as well. Who knows? But he wasn't really. He'd been through the mill anyway. With the organization, trying to maintain a push, trying to work within the politics inside the organization, always striving to be the best he could possibly be, not just in the ring, but on the promos when he was able to cut those. But I don't think that he was totally happy with that direction at this point. I'm trying to remember if they were trying to tone him down with some of the crazy bumps and all the things that he did, because it was making other people look bad, and a lot of people weren't really fans of that extreme, hardcore way he worked. So there could have been a lot of reasons, a lot of questions that are developing just listening back at that now.
I wondered if he knew how to play that role. Like, that's like 180 from where he's at.
Good question.
It's subdued, and like he's getting that. And so that was my kind of wondering, is just how do I fit this character into that role? And what made us love him was that. So why change it all? And which we see later in his career. Yeah.
Well, yeah, obviously the career and the things that he accomplished were incredible. But this point was an interesting. This gets to be an interesting year for him, as we'll uncover in future episodes, with the injuries, all the stuff. Don't remember if this was. He might. Yeah, it might be to the point where right before he went to Germany and lost his ear.
Yeah, it has to be, because he's talking about he's starting a feud here with Paul Orndorff and Vader.
Yeah.
And he's got a match coming up like that Wednesday, which is a tag match, Vader and Orndorff. He doesn't know who his tag partner's going to be yet, but he's just starting the Vader feud. And yeah, Vader's the one who ripped it off.
Yeah.
His
head got caught in the ropes in Germany. They were a little too tight. Yeah, so I'm sure we'll be covering all of that stuff too. A very pivotal year for our friend Mick Foley at this juncture.
Did you get to talk to him right after his ear was ripped off?
I'm sure I did. He was living around the corner from me.
Oh, well then, yeah. Did you see him just around the streets as you would walk around and stuff?
Well, he had just gotten married. He was looking for an apartment. This may be premature at this specific show that we're covering. And a good friend of my family's had a house, and they had an open apartment. He was looking for a place, so I made the introduction, and then they rented it out to him. It was kind of funny too, because they were very old school Italians. like very conservative. And you know how Cactus Jack looked, right?
Yeah.
So how
Very
am I supposed,
conservative.
what's going to happen here? He wants this apartment. He wants to make a good impression. So I remember going there with him, and he actually put on a sport coat, and he tied his hair back so it wasn't crazy, and he was very polite and very nice, and they took a liking to him. And he wound up staying in West Babylon for a few years, and even he even brought it up on an ECW promo when he was with ECW. How his kids were like, "Daddy, why do we have to stay here on Long Island?" And this, and he was like, "Yeah, this the hot box or the sweatshop that we're living in." And but anyway, I mean, it was just we were friends, and the one thing that was really funny was my mom. My mom initially was petrified of him. And when I said, he's coming over to watch some videotapes with me, oh, I don't want that. I don't want him here. She was so afraid, and he was so polite when he'd show up. And Mrs. Oresi, how are you? But initially, until she got to know him, she was scared of him because he, looked like
Like crazy person.
looked like a bad guy.
That's cool. I didn't realize that. As much as you mentioned these people were your friends in those eras, I think there's still just a big disconnect from what we know nowadays about people being friendly but not friends, right? And I always just figured you had a very friendly relationship with these people. But if he was coming to the house and watching old matches, right? Is that what the tapes were?
Yeah. He'd bring matches over, and when he got back from Japan after he burnt himself to a crisp over there, and we traveled the roads together. We'd go to shows together, and he'd go on the bus trips with us, and
Oh, that's cool.
that's one of the reasons that he was able to get back into WCW. Is he went on a pay-per-view bus trip to the Meadowlands, and he went backstage, and that's where he saw Dusty, and they had the conversation, and before you know it, he's back in WCW. And but we traveled to ECW together, and he got him his car with Lindy Motors back then, and that's where he got that world famous convertible. Featured on an upcoming, I believe, Lost Treasure show down the road.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, the friendship is, he was just somebody that that I took a liking to immediately. I was so impressed when I first started seeing his matches from Texas when he'd bring over the tapes, because I wasn't that familiar with him when he made his first appearance in September of '89. And then he made a tape up for me, and I was just blown away by what he was doing in the ring, and our friendship developed, and we hung out, we socialized, and to this day, I would consider him, the person that I was kind of closest to when it came to performers. Him and Paul Lee were my two closest guys.
That's cool. It's just interesting. It's fascinating to hear. So that's why I know it's not exactly on topic, but
No, it's just a backstory of the relationship.
Because it's also interesting, just the dichotomy of the two interviews. Paul is super out of kayfabe. He's going to tell you what his contract said and where he stayed and who's doing what. And then Cactus is building a match for Wednesday and completely kayfabe.
Yeah.
So they were right next to each other, and I thought it was really cool. Joe?
I'm with your mom. I was scared to death of Cactus. I didn't go to a house show because Cactus was wrestling Sting. And I told my grandfather, I don't want to, we can go, but can we be in the upper deck? Because, Cactus might get out in the crowd. I was maybe 12.
Yeah, well, there you go.
But, I mean, he sold that to the point as a 12-year-old. I was scared of Cactus. I was scared of Sting.
Yeah.
And, you really appreciate that now when you look back on those memories and just say, wow. I mean, that's what he did.
Suspension of disbelief. And, that was kind of the way I felt about the original Sheik. Scared shitless of him.
Right.
Mankind, when he first came out, that was my first introduction to him. I was 12. I didn't see any wrestling outside of WWE because no one I knew liked it except for my one friend who would watch everything he could find. And that original version of Mankind had me so terrified that I would step to the side so I couldn't see the TV but I
No
could
kidding.
hear. And if I thought like he was about to lose, I poked my head around because he was scaring the hell out of me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So if I can tell a real quick Cactus story
Sure.
about Sacco. So the original Sacco, when Vince McMahon gets attacked in the hospital, happened at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, Michigan.
Mhm.
My wife at the time works at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, Michigan. So she has heard that they're going to film tonight on this floor. So she gives me a call and she's like, I don't know what it is, but she knows I love wrestling. And she said, if you want to come down and get you on the floor, but I don't know, it could be nothing. So from me to about 25 yards away, I see Vince McMahon come in. I see, we don't know what's going on in there, but that suspension of disbelief, you can see him go in, you see him come out. Hey, Mick, hey, Vince, and it was just that 15 seconds, 20 seconds of, wow, this is pretty damn special. And then you watch it, the filming of it, and it's like, wow, this is pretty damn cool.
Yeah.
And who knew Sacco was going to take off like it did?
Who knew? I mean,
crazy.
That segment and that whole deal, I mean, is still to this day one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah.
That hospital sequence and Urkel, the clown. Yerpel. And Mr. Sacco, say hello to Mr. Sacco. And then it took off. It was huge. And then who knows how many Mr. Saccos have been sold since that time.
I mean, just marketing genius. And when I look back at it, to get into a hospital to do, what they did, is just the power of WWE. And, my wife would say to me, like, I don't know how they did this. This is not what we do. And I was like, I don't know. I'll be there, and I skipped whatever I was doing that night. I was coaching football for sure, and got over there. It was amazing.
That's a great memory. What a great story.
When I knew Cactus, this topic was going to come up, it was like, hey, this is a way to work that in. Maybe.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah.
And who got the opportunity back then to even be a witness of seeing this kind of unfold right there in person, not being allowed in the room. Obviously you weren't in there, but something was going on, and then you see it unfold on TV the next day. Or was it live? Or
no? So it was not live. It was pre-recorded.
So it was a pre-tape. They pre-taped it.
And Sparrow Hospital. That's where it was at.
That's very nice. Good piece of trivia.
It's cool too because, like you said, it's your favorite, John, but it's also just an iconic, legendary moment that gets replayed time after time after time.
Yep.
Especially any Raw highlights, that's coming up.
Right.
It's got to be cool for you to see that and be like, I was about 20 feet away from, you know what I mean? Like, I was just right up the hall. Like, that's cool.
That's very cool.
And there was me and two doctors. I mean, that was the other thing. It's like one of those special moments where you're like, hey, it's me and two other guys and nobody else.
Yeah, lifelong memory. That one.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, so you had a couple of callers.
Okay.
You were talking about how Flair's coming back February 21st on the big Super Brawl that's coming up. The first caller you get is, and you also say, and WWE's going to be holding another TV taping on Monday night, which I thought was a funny passing sentence that you made, where it's all like, he's talking about like the second Monday Night Raw ever. And it's
the
just
second Monday Night Raw ever, yeah. Oh, they got a house show there in Manhattan again at this place. So
yeah, I guess they're doing another taping. And then your first caller's question is, when's Flair coming back? So you had just said he calls, and now you got to tell him. But I'm sure his radio was down. But this is where, in between the two callers that you got, because you only had a couple minutes left in the show, you thank a couple people, and you explain why you're thanking them, and it has to do with why you were late. So I'm going to play it. Where you can explain yourself, John.
Okay.
I just want to thank our engineer today, Tom Ross, for doing an excellent job, and our producer, Bruce Jacobs, because I got here late myself, and we had an important show. I was up very late last night trying to put this show together, and a lot of things have been going on, I tell you. in the world of pro wrestling, and I just want to thank you two guys today for helping out and doing such a great job.
Giving kudos to the team. Bruce Jacobs. Bruce Jacobs was the original producer of Pro Wrestling Spotlight, who was with me in the beginning and then left. And Tom Ross, or Tom Rosenbluth, or he was the guy that I talk about, who was a very peculiar individual at WNYG, and it seemed like he lived there. And he did have the office downstairs that they used to lock him up in, because he was a telephone solicitor to get leads for the salespeople. He was a substitute DJ. He was an engineer. He helped with the promotion department. He did everything there, and he had this wild, bushy hair and this bushy beard, and he wore the same sweater, I think, every day for 10 years. And he had long fingernails, and he was very odd in his delivery of dialect.
I mean, did he say things weird?
Well, let's say at the end of every conversation, he would just say, "Hi ho, see you later." It'd always start with "Hi ho" for whatever reason.
He's either into the seven dwarfs,
and he'd rake his nails across his sweater a lot too, if I remember correctly.
Huh.
But a very nice guy, but just a legacy, a legend at WNYG and on Long Island radio. I mean, he spent years and years at WNYG.
That's crazy. That's cool though. I mean, of course, if you're the one dude who knows everything that building does, then yeah, you'll stay.
Yeah, he was he knew everything about everything there, and but the pathetic part was the fact that he was locked in that room.
There's no sunlight.
You're not coming out until you got 4 leads for the salespeople. That would be the general sales manager, Larry Walsh.
They would lock it? They wouldn't just close the door?
I don't think he was bolted in. But he knew that he couldn't leave until he got some quality leads for the general manager, the general sales manager, to distribute to the other salespeople. Although the general sales manager would take the best leads for himself, because they'd be rated 1 to 5, and then he'd give you leads because I sold for them, and it was my first real radio job, one of my first real radio jobs as a salesperson, and he'd give you a lead that was 8 months old. Give him a shout, And anyway, I mean, there's so many stories about WNYG, so many, and the characters and the quality talent that came in and out of that door. It was a radio station that there should be a documentary about someday, with the owners, the Hornsteins, and Mrs. H jumping out the window once because the IRS was coming. The bottles of ketchup for the Christmas bonuses. Mr. Hornstein, who she would call everybody Cookie. That was her name, Cookie. And she'd see her husband and she'd say, "Cookie, throw him down the stairs. We'll split the insurance." Things like that.
Was this the station that had the clocks that you would try
yes.
to put up places?
Yeah. The WNYG clocks for the advertisers. You buy a package for 10 weeks, $100 a week, and you get a free clock with your name on it to put in your business, and of course that's where I sold a package to the Pines Motor Lodge in West Babylon, right where I was. It was kind of a in and out hotel, if you know what I'm talking about. It was like their day business dominated their sales.
Sure.
So I signed him to a 10-week package. The guy's name was James Sammartino, no relation to Bruno, and you'd collect money every week. The package was $100 a week, and you'd get 2 spots a day. One commercial in the morning, one in the afternoon, some promo announcements. The clock promotion is brought to you by the Pines Motor Lodge, and so you sign the guy up, and then it was up to you to collect the money every week. The owners of the station had put a clause in the contract where they signed that if you defaulted on your payment, they could go into your bank account at any time and take the remaining funds. So they were signing away kind of a power of attorney that you could go into their bank account. So I'd go into the business on the first week and, hey, John, how you doing? Here's your payment. And we didn't get any calls yet because he bought a case of champagne. And he said, if you mention WNYG, you'll get a bottle of champagne. And Joseph, you might have heard this on some of the old episodes. But each week he got a little bit more frustrated and angry. And third week is like, no one has come in not once to mention the radio station. And then the fifth week, and really, the problems is like, he was like, I bought a case of champagne and no one has asked for a bottle. And I was like, well, let's have a party. And that was not the right thing to say. And he got very upset with me. And I went back to the station and I told the bookkeeper, Pearl was her name. She a little Jewish lady who was tough as nails, and all she wanted was the payments and the money. And I went in and I was like, put the note in on the Pines Motor Lodge. He's not going to pay anymore. And they got their payment. And then several months later, I was in a liquor store with the sales manager at the time. We were getting ready to party or do whatever. And I see the guy in the liquor store, and he just turns around and he goes, "It's you. It's you. You took money out of my..." I was like, it wasn't me. It's their station. I mean, so anyway, that didn't end well.
I hope he was there buying champagne.
I was going to ask.
He might have been.
By chance, was he returning champagne?
He might have been returning champagne.
He's got like a case in his hands, just like, I can't.
You felt bad. You're trying to make a living, and the station is so small, and the results are really non-existent for the most part. So you'd always have to hustle. And it taught me a great deal about selling radio advertising. It was really, roots. And you learn to get rejected a lot. And you learn to deal with customer service a lot. And but some advertisers it did work for, but most of them it did not.
And you learned about ill-timed jokes.
Ill-timed jokes. Yeah, I did learn about that.
It would be so cool to see one of those clocks somewhere, just as a little note of history, because it was the wall clock, right?
It was gold and black.
I think it'd be so
and every
fun.
time I go home, I still call New York home, and I drive past the Pines Motor Lodge. I always look in the lobby to see if that clock is still up there after 40 years now.
I think it'd be so cool to go in there and look around.
Drive past.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you can see in when you're driving past. I'd go in.
You can, yeah. I don't. That place is very seedy. It was seedy back then. I don't know what the hell if it's a crack den today. I have no idea. I don't know what
I
it
don't
is.
park my car there.
It ain't looking good. That's for sure. I ain't finding me go in there at all.
That's funny. All right. So then the last bit of the show, we have one clip from a caller, Jason from Northport. And there's something in this that really stuck out to me that I wanted to ask you about. So
let's go to Jason from Northport. Jason, you're next.
John, how's it going?
Okay.
I have a question about Jerry Lawler and Randy Savage. You see them behind the booth a lot. Are they going to start wrestling again like Savage? He's been out a lot.
Savage is not going to wrestle as many dates as he has previously, and Lawler's really not going to wrestle in the WWF. He's strictly going to work behind the microphone. He's going to do some pay-per-views, but he's not going to be on the road with them.
And who do you see the new main eventer in the WWF?
Well, you got Narcissus coming in, which is Lex Luger, and he's certainly going to be a dominant figure. Hennig is going to be a dominant figure, and Bret Hart will certainly still be up there. But I really see at this point Luger getting the title from Hart and then feuding with Hennig.
And no sign of Hogan.
No sign of Hogan. Hogan was just on the Miller and Company Nashville Network TV talk show and said that if he goes back to active wrestling, he's going to wrestle in Japan. He didn't mention wrestling back for the WWF.
Okay, thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks for your call.
What is the question?
The narcissist.
The Narcissus.
The narcissist.
I had no idea what that was.
Because we heard it on the other show, and I meant to mention because you said narcissist.
Yeah.
like 3 times, and then Donnie says it back. Yeah, it does look like they're going with this weird narcissist thing. And I was like,
We knew it was Greek somehow.
I just got a kick out of it. I thought
I never heard of narcissist before.
it just didn't come up, right?
It just never came up, and it was never in my vernacular, or I've never heard the. And I saw it, and I was like, "What is this narcissist? What is this?" Until he finally, I heard it on TV, and I was like, "Oh shit, I screwed up." It's not narcissist. It's narcissist, which was an ill-fated gimmick to begin with. So maybe it should have been narcissist.
Yeah, they could have done more with it if it wasn't the right word.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a kick out of it because I've heard other people say that was their first introduction to that word too. It wasn't like isolated to you.
Yeah, but why even come up with a name like that? I mean, what kind of that was crazy. That was a horrible gimmick.
Right. Now, because most of us didn't hear the word narcissist for very long, there's no way Vince McMahon was not very familiar with that word.
Well, consider the source of that statement,
What I'm saying. He probably had heard it quite a bit
a
number of times and thought we could do this.
Yeah, he had a painting in his house that had his full physique, flexing, and it was like Narcissus.
Narcissus.
Good
I know you had met him, but you never saw his house, did you?
Who?
Vince.
If I went 5 miles near that guy's house, I would have been shot.
Yeah.
Someone in a watchtower would have taken me out. You kidding me?
Yeah, there's flyers with your face, I'm sure, still up.
Yeah, I'm sure. He, there could be even a toilet bowl where my face is on the bottom of the bowl and he, relieves himself on it.
Yeah, it's just like a little bee sticker, except it's a little
Yeah.
Resi.
Yeah. Maybe from 30 years ago. Who knows if he even remembers me?
That's why we
I
got
feel like that's a long list for him.
He might. Yeah,
there's a lot of those guys.
Yeah, he wasn't enamored with me. He never liked, I was big, I was heavy, he hates fat people. And, it's like, it was just, I was just like I said before, I was a pesky housefly that wouldn't go away.
You told the truth. I don't want that.
That's annoying.
Yeah. When you're trying to sell something, you don't want the truth out there.
Yeah, you can't have that.
And it's like, no time has passed because what am I talking about for the first 20 minutes of this show? Talking about Vince McMahon again.
And that truth again.
And that damn truth. What is he up to now? What is he up to?
And it's still selling for him. It's still on every damn news channel. It's
My
not
goodness,
scary.
yes. Look what he's doing.
Yeah, that's the part that is so frustrating for me. It is on brand. Marsh, you said it earlier. It's so on brand for him. He knows how to sell this, and that is him being a creep and him being an asshole. He knows how to do that.
That's right, pal.
That's right. It comes very natural.
He's had a lot of practice.
Yes, he has. Everybody's friend, Vince McMahon.
Yeah. But that was the show on that one. I thought it was a really cool. It was like, it felt so compact because you had so much Paul, a very small Cactus, and a really couple phone calls. So.
A lot of meat, a lot of substance in this episode.
Yeah.
Well, I can't say kind of the same about next week.
Next week's is good.
A little preview, which is going to be the January 23rd, 1993 show. It's a bizarre one. It's very bizarre. I'm in Philadelphia for the John Clark Big Wrestling Convention, the weekend where Kerry had his last match. And Donnie Leibel, who was not in Philadelphia, but is subbing for me in the beginning of the episode, and he does an interview with Bill Eadie, Demolition Guy, right?
Yeah.
Axe, whatever. And then, I kind of give a report from Philly, which we'll hear. And then we have a shitload of really cool Freddie Blassie content, which I'm not going to give away the farm.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting, crazy, wacky show with me not being there because I'm at the convention. So it'll be a lot of fun. And then, of course, in 2 weeks, January 30th, 1993. That's the 30-year anniversary of the death of Anya.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and next week's episode also ends with the most bizarre commercial.
Yeah.
I listened to it 5 or 6 times trying to figure out if it was a part of your show or not and what they were trying to sell.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it definitely
let's not
happened
give away
before
too
the
much.
final music. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you'll pull the clip for next week.
I'm definitely pulling the clip because I just kept going back and forth going, what am I listening to? And then your outro hits. So it was definitely part of the show. It was before the music.
Yep. Well, we'll have to wait and see, everybody.
Yep.
Joseph, my executive producer, one of two, you and Anthony.
Gotta get you more.
Gotta get, I'd love to get as many patrons as we can. I mean, whoever's on the Patreon is very consistent. They stay. You lose a couple here or there, and you gain a couple here and there. But for the most part, people, once they join, they stay. They don't cancel. They stay. So I have to thank you every time I communicate with you, because people like you who support what I'm trying to do is so very important, and I'm very grateful for that.
And John, I just want to say I'm so thankful for this, and I know I can get on the soapbox, but I listen to a lot of the other shows just in driving and passing, and there's just not this content anyplace. You can't. No. You know, I listen to the Ric Flair show, and I can listen to about 3 minutes of it. And I loved Ric Flair growing up, but it's like it's not this. And before we go, just your show 30 years ago, listening to that show, who else was doing that? Who else could get Paulie? Who else could get Mick Foley and have that level of a conversation? Nobody. And you were offering something back then to the fans that is still not appreciated. So when we can go back and listen to it, and I will play these shows for my friends now that still love wrestling and just say, listen, this is, not only was it great then, but going back and revisiting, this is amazing stuff. And just thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's never thought that, 30 years after the fact that I'd be reliving this stuff. Because for me, it's just it's as much of a so many different emotions every week when I hear these shows for the first time in 30 years when I'm uploading them, and it was an interesting time. But capturing the history from 30 years ago and hearing the people who made the news on the show and getting them to talk freely about what was going on, that was really unique. It really was, and I always enjoyed having those opportunities, and I always enjoyed when I'd have a guest on who kind of let their hair down and just spoke freely. And with Paulie's case, a lawsuit, another one that he had against the company he worked for, and giving him the platform because he knew that other outlets would pick up on what he's talking about. And they would have a bigger reach than I did, like the Observer. Not necessarily the Torch so much. But, yeah, it was kind of like, what's going on a Resi show this week, And a lot of people traded tapes years ago. They'd send tapes to people from different parts of the country because they, were lucky to, on the WNYG stuff anyways, to be able to hear the station around the corner.
So that I didn't mention that the last time I was on the show, and I was really upset with myself. That is how I was introduced to you and Howard Stern. Was family member, an uncle in New York he knew I loved wrestling, so twice a year he would bring tapes of. You're getting a glimpse into my childhood, and maybe not the best parenting, but I'd get some tapes of Howard and get some tapes of you, and wouldn't know for sure what I'm listening to, but I would know that it's conversations about wrestling that I hadn't heard. Now years later, and I said it to you last time, and I kind of just left it there, and it didn't make any sense. But I was like, he doesn't understand. I didn't live in New York, but these tapes were traded, and I would get to listen to this, and now I'm sitting here talking to the man. It was amazing to think at that point. I don't know if you knew how much reach you had outside of New York, and The other thing I think needs to be stated for everyone was you were doing this for the love of the industry because you weren't making money. I mean, I listened to the book or read the book. You're doing this because you love the sport, and I just thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's been an interesting ride on my pro wrestling roller coaster. A lot of times I've jumped out off the roller coaster and then I find my way back in somehow. So, it is what it is. But I mean, those comments mean a lot to me, and I appreciate you joining us. And I look forward to you coming back. And I'll send you a list of shows when the time is approaching again for your next appearance, and say which one do you want to participate in. So I'll give you the choice next time.
I appreciate it, and I will be. I'll be listening.
You got it. All right, my friend. Thank you, and good luck with your negotiations and everything that's going on there for you. And
I'll tell you what, we can't break contracts like WCW. That's for
right.
damn sure.
That's right. But I'll leave you with 2 words, Mr. Sacco.
Love it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate it. All right, Joseph Holloway, one of our executive producers level on our Patreon page. And Marsh, good show today.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. This was a really cool one.
You're very relaxed and very, finding a flow, finding a nice little flow.
Yeah, figuring out a way to have the conversation.
Yeah, and I like the participation from the patrons.
Yes, I've really enjoyed both Joe and Anthony. I think they added a lot to the shows.
Yeah, and then we have a few others that'll be joining us over the next few weeks, and then we'll, in a month or so, month and a half, whatever it is, and when it's time to circulate them back again, and we'll do that. And but it's really good to get a perspective from the people who really support the show more than any others, really, if you're looking at the levels that they're on the Patreon. So it's a pleasure, and I really appreciate your questioning, your help, your creative skills, and we will be doing this again next week. So before we head out, why don't you let everybody know where they could find Ref Marsh?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at RefMarsh. We've got wrestlingontherocks.com is where I post up all my other fun extracurriculars that are a little wrestling related. But that's it, yeah.
And you got a little Medusa stuff you do too, don't you?
Yep, I'm over on Paving the Way with Medusa over at youtube.com/Queen of Carnage, doing that in her trash talk.
Yeah, she there was some discussion today because, as you know, I represent John Gibbons.
Mm-hmm.
And John has a book coming out, as Deborah does. Same publisher, ECW Press. So I think there's going to be a Gibby appearance on her show, and her going on the show that I do with John Gibbons that we're bringing back February 1st, right around time spring training is getting ready to kick off. So that could be interesting.
It's going to be wild. I've heard a lot of Gibby.
Yeah, Gibby is a funny guy, man. I was on the phone with him today because we're talking about some really interesting stuff that I can't really get into. That could be pro wrestling related. So keep the dial where it is. It'll be a lot of fun. But
that's cool.
Yeah, we're going to get into a lot of cool stuff, and we did hear from a rep from Kurt Angle today. So it looks like we'll be having Kurt come on and talk about some wrestling history as well with us down the road. Cool. That'll be fun. All right, Marsh, thank you, of course. And this is going to wrap up this edition of John Aresi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight. You can join our private group on Facebook.com/Pro Wrestling Spotlight Podcast and Radio Show. We have a public page that's doing really, really well, and that is Facebook.com/John Aresi's Matt Memories. The engagement has skyrocketed on the Facebook pages, and I think it's because I started uploading some new, 50 years ago, 45. I'm putting up a lot of new photographs that I recently digitized from the 70s, and people are digging it. I mean, whether it's a picture of the Valiant Brothers or Hogan, Steamboat Youngblood, people are Spiros Arion, and there's just these pictures I'm putting up that for people are just digging it, and the engagement and the growth on the Facebook page has skyrocketed, as is the Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at John Arezzi, Twitter at John Arezzi. And if anybody has a wild hair up their ass and would like a signed and numbered copy of my book, Matt Memories, send an email to me, john@mattmemories.com. Don't forget to check out the sister podcast that I do, Matt Memories from Madison Square Garden. The next one is going to cover that January 15th, 1973 show where I started shooting 8mm films, and patrons will be able to see some of those films. But that show will be taped this weekend, and it'll be out for patrons next week, and then the general public after that. Check it out wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And that Matt Memories from Madison Square Garden is co-hosted by Tim Poutre, written and researched by my friend Richie Garcia, who was one of the original Booster Club members for Pro Wrestling Spotlight all those years ago. I want to thank our producer, creative director, Marsh. Marsh, thank you so much. And thank you to the Patreon executive producers, Anthony Pyrus and Joe Holloway, and all the patrons for your support helping with the production costs for this show. Until next week, when we relive more history with you, this is John Arezzi for the Pro Wrestling Spotlight.